Turning to politics, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has threatened to call a double dissolution election if the Greens fail to support Labor's housing bill. Joining me live is federal Liberal MP and manager for opposition business Paul Fletcher. Mr Fletcher, welcome to Weekend Edition. Now, before we do talk politics, tragic morning for the Australian military, of course, with 4 people feared dead in a military helicopter crash off Hamilton Island. Absolutely devastating news, and just a reminder of the dangers that members of the Defence Force experience every day. Part of Operation Talisman Sabre, which is a very important military exercise. Australia, the US, a whole range of other countries. It's very important that our military are training for the job that they may have to do one day. We all hope they never have to do, but they may have to do one day. But it is an inherently dangerous job, serving our country. So I know all of us will be thinking of their families at this difficult time and obviously awaiting what sadly we expect will be the official confirmation of the loss of life. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have more on that breaking news throughout the course of the day. Of course, we've heard from Defence Minister Richard Marles, but it's an unfolding story. Now, let's talk at politics proper. We'll change the subject. The PM threatening to call a double dissolution if the Greens don't support Labor's housing bill. What do you make of it? Well, this happens every term of Parliament. The Constitution's very clear that there's a range of reasons for which an election could be called early. I think the earliest an election could be called is August next year. There's nothing out of the ordinary here. I'll just make the point that the housing bill, which the Prime Minister is threatening to use as a trigger, it's already been rejected once. The Coalition doesn't support it. This is poor policy. It's borrowing $10 billion, investing it in the market. If it makes a profit, then the profit will be used for social housing. Now, as Michael Surker, our housing spokesman, has pointed out, last year the markets went down. Well, there wouldn't have been any money for housing. And it's not clear each year how much will be available. Hardly going to produce predictable flow of new housing investment. What we really need to do is make it as easy as possible for Australians to buy houses that are supplied through the private market. That means getting interest rates down to make housing more affordable. Unfortunately, this government's going in the wrong direction, continuing to spend, driving interest rates up, inflation rates up. Interest rates up 11 times on this Prime Minister's watch. On average, for a typical mortgage, certainly in Sydney, that could mean an extra $20,000 a year that a household has to find to cover the cost of a mortgage. It's no wonder a lot of Aussies are doing it tough right now. Yeah, the bright news at the moment is it looks like it's going to be status quo this Tuesday, but no doubt as you head back to Parliament, cost of living, interest rates, inflation are going to be pivotal in discussion. Look, these will be absolutely central to the issues we'll be pursuing in question time and through other forums in Parliament, as well as interest rates going up and up. We've also got energy bills. 1 July this year, we saw an increase in energy bills around the country. On average, 28% increases, massive increases in what people are paying for their gas and electricity bills. Now, Mr Albanese came to power promising that energy bills would be going down by $275. They're going up. And what is worse is that in the wholesale energy markets, we're seeing the cost of generation going up in the second quarter of this year. In due course, that will likely feed through into retail energy prices as well. This government is facing an energy price crisis, which is affecting households, it's affecting businesses. I mean, energy costs are one of the big input costs for businesses. And so we need to see a plan from this government to deal with rising energy prices. Unfortunately, we're not seeing anything really that is effective in engaging with this problem. Well, in the midst of the energy pricing crisis, and I know it's not federal politics, but it's a story that's breaking the last couple of days, is Daniel Andrews in Victoria announcing no gas from next year. There is a balance that is needed. Government is challenging. You've got to deal with a lot of different things at once. Yes, we need to achieve net zero by 2050. Of course, the Morrison government made that commitment on behalf of Australia. But what you need to make sure you're doing is, as well as transforming our energy grid, you've got to make sure that power remains affordable and reliable. And sadly, with Chris Bowen in charge, we don't see much evidence of the capacity of this government to manage these competing objectives. And what we are seeing is energy prices going up and up and up. And that is bad news for Australian families, Australian businesses, the Australian economy.
and we need to see this being addressed in a much better fashion by this government.
As well as cost of living and interest rates and inflation and many other things in Parliament, the voice is going to be pivotal again?
Look, it is. I mean, before the parliamentary recess, we used question time to ask questions of Linda Burney, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, and of the Prime Minister about what is proposed. We're now at a point where all the votes in Parliament have been taken. When this referendum occurs, when the Prime Minister announces the date and the referendum occurs, it'll be for the Australian people to make their decision, and so people naturally will want as much information as possible to be able to make that decision. And we'll certainly be looking to use the forums of Parliament to assist the Australian people in gathering the information they need by asking the kind of questions that in turn constituents are raising with me, and I'm sure all of my parliamentary colleagues around the country.
Are you finding your constituents don't quite understand what it's all about? Has there been enough explanation as to exactly what it is?
Whenever you're asking the Australian people to make a decision in a referendum, it is very important that they are getting as much information as possible, including the precise nature of the change that they're being asked to support and what it will mean and how it will work. And so that's why we as an opposition have been continuing to press for as much information as possible. It's now out of the hands of parliamentarians, it's in the hands of the Australian people. But it is absolutely a proper part of our role to be saying to government, well, explain, please, how this is going to work. You know, we insisted on there being the 2 pamphlets being sent to the Australian people, one setting out the yes case, one setting out the no case. The government's original intention was to do away with that requirement. We thought that was a very bad idea because it is important that people have in front of them the arguments yes and no, so that individual Australians who are called upon to vote can make their decision based upon the best arguments that each side is able to put forward. All
right, let's have a quick look at foreign policy. Of course, important meetings going on in Brisbane today. Of course, the United States, our military relationship. How important is it? And we've seen Prime Minister Anthony Albanese coming out and saying it's never been stronger.
The United States relationship is, of course, our most important security relationship. It's enormously important, and it's founded on shared values. You know, I had the privilege last Saturday of being at the commencement ceremony for the USS Canberra at Garden Island or Fleet Base East in Sydney. Very, very rare for a US ship to be named after the capital of a foreign country. It commemorates the original HMAS Canberra, which went down in a battle in 1942, I think. The US then named a ship the Canberra in World War II, and this will now be the second US ship named the Canberra. That is, and of course the US Secretary of the Navy was there. Maurice Payne, former Defence Minister, was there, and she is what's called the ship's patron, I think is the term, or sponsor, ship sponsor. So she has a continuing role in relation to the USS Canberra, which I might add is a so-called littoral combat ship made by the US subsidiary of an Australian company. So it is very symbolic of that close relationship. It's an important security relationship. It's based on shared values. And of course, the Morrison government, by entering into the AUKUS agreement, really took that relationship forward. And the US and the UK will be sharing with Australia some of their most sensitive technology, their nuclear technology. That is very important for the future. We want a peaceful Indo-Pacific, and Australia needs to do its part in maintaining peace and stability so that every country in the Indo-Pacific can prosper.
On a much lighter note to finish with, Australian-UK relations have been pushed to the edge over this Ashes series. We've got a few days to play. We've retained the Ashes, but we want to win it.
Of course we do, and the Australian team has done a fantastic job. They've had some heavy expectations on them, and yeah, there's been a better back and forth about the conduct of the respective teams. Of course, that's a great historical tradition going back to Bodyline and other great contests over the decades. This is it's so important for all Aussies who love their sport, but it's also so important in terms of those deep connections between our two countries. And you know, it's not just Australia and Britain where there's that shared love of cricket, but also India. I was doing a podcast yesterday with some young Indians, and a lot of talk about cricket there. So cricket's such an important part of our national identity, And well done to the Aussie Test team. They've done us proud.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've spent a lot of time covering cricket in India myself, the subcontinental connection between Australia, huge both politically and sports-wise going forward. All right, thanks for coming in, Mr. Fletcher. Appreciate it.